Welcome everyone. And today is an important thing we need to be discussing. As we all know, we're beholden to a system that is not built with every child in mind. And I want to start with a question. How many of you, raise your hands, in the last 12 months have had a parent sit opposite you, a parent, and tell you they don't know how much longer they can cope? Raise your hands. It's not that their child is struggling, not the paperwork that's overwhelming, but they, the parent, are at breaking point. And that's the reality behind the statistic we're going to talk about today. More than 1.7 million pupils in England are currently navigating the education system with SEND. It's not a data point, not a funding line, 1.7 million children. And behind almost every one of them is a family doing everything they can just to get through the week. And the system we have, the system that most of us in this room are working within and working incredibly hard to improve, was built for a different era. Fixed buildings, fixed timetables, a single model applied to every child, a century-old architecture being asked to serve a population whose needs have never been more diverse. The cost to families. When families contact us at Minerva Virtual Academy, the school I founded and launched in 2021, when they contact us, they're not shopping for an alternative. They've usually already spent months, sometimes years, fighting. I want parents to be coming to us because they think it's the first best option, but that is not the case at the moment. Parents coming to MVA have spent years fighting for an EHCP, fighting for a placement, fighting the school that kept telling them their child would settle in, fighting the local authority that said there was nothing available, or that they would have to wait months for a decision. By the time they reach us at MVA, many are exhausted. Some have taken on debt to fund educational psychologists, private tutoring, or alternative provision. Some have had to reduce their working hours or stop working altogether to manage their child's needs at home. And the emotional toll is immeasurable. I'm going to tell you a case study about a parent at MBA. I'll call them an MBA mum. Her daughter had autism, ADHD, and profound anxiety. She is 15 years old, and she has essentially lost 3 years of education. This is a classic MBA parent. We have 1,500 students full-time at our school. She lost 3 years of education, not because provision wasn't arranged, not because nobody tried, but because every time a placement was found, the environment wasn't built for a child like her. Mainstream settings did their best, but their best meant one-to-one support in a separate room, away from her peers, managing each day as a small crisis rather than an education. And then one day, the school said they couldn't continue, and she wasn't allowed back. 3 years of education gone. Just sit with that for a moment. That's happening to hundreds of thousands of students across the UK. While that was going on, the MVA mum was fighting the transport system, challenging decisions, driving her daughter herself for 3 hours a day, paying out of her own pocket where funding disputes left her with no choice. She reversed decisions that other families couldn't, not because she was right and they were wrong, but because she knew the law and had the words to argue it. So many families in that position simply don't, so their children stay home. Her daughter wants to be a midwife. The system didn't fail her in one dramatic moment. It failed her slowly, quietly, in every gap between one form and the next. Let's talk about the cost to teachers. Let's be honest about what we're asking of teachers. How many of you are teachers in the room? Raise your hand. My people. Let's be honest about what we're asking of our teachers. We're asking professionals to simultaneously deliver a curriculum, manage increasingly complex classroom dynamics, support children who may be experiencing sensory overload, trauma, anxiety, or an undiagnosed need, and to do all this with funding that hasn't kept pace and class sizes that haven't shrunk. Teachers are being asked to be one-person factories, and the burnout rate reflects that. We cannot keep expecting the system to stretch to meet every child if we don't give it the flexibility to do so. Let me tell you about teacher case study experience with MBA, our school. It's not just families who are being failed by lack of flexibility, it's the people who we rely on to teach them, the teachers. I want to tell you about a teacher I'll call MBA teacher. She gave 18 years to the same secondary school, 18 years. She was an English teacher, a safeguarding lead, a mental health lead, a trauma practitioner. She turned up every day for children whose lives were genuinely hard, the kind of children who needed someone in their corner. And she was that person until the system kept shrinking. She was being asked to teach subjects she wasn't qualified in. And while the time set aside for the safeguarding work she was trained for was quietly cut away to fill timetable gaps. At home, she and her husband, also a teacher, were raising 2 neurodivergent daughters, paying over £1,000 a month for childcare, with no school breakfast club, no after-school provision, and 2 demanding jobs between them. So she asked for 20 minutes each morning to take her daughters to school. It was refused. After 18 years, that was the answer, and it broke something. She was eventually signed off with severe anxiety and depression. Her doctor was clear. This wasn't her, this was the environment. She told us she didn't know where she would have ended up if she'd carried on, but she found us at MBA. And the tragedy is she never stopped caring about the children. She just needed a system, a school that cared about her too. I'm afraid to do this, but please raise your hand if you have heard of or been involved in similar situations as a teacher. Thank you. Now, let's talk about the environment, because it's not the curriculum. The environment is often the barrier. Here's what I want you to sit with for a moment. Many of the children we're talking about are not struggling academically. They are not less capable. They are struggling with the environment they are in. Busy corridors, unstructured break times, sensory overload in a classroom of 30 children, the social complexity of a school day that, for a neurotypical child, is simply background noise. But for a child with autism, ADHD, anxiety, or sensory processing differences, this normal environment, inverted commas, is completely overwhelming. For these children, the barrier to education is not the curriculum, it's the container the curriculum comes in. And the data is telling us something. Are we listening to that? Are we listening to the data? Come on, guys. 5 years ago, we started MBA with a straightforward premise that high-quality education doesn't have to happen in a physical building, that the best teachers, the most engaging curriculum, and the right level of support could be delivered online. And that, for some children, removing the environmental pressures of a traditional school would unlock something that no amount of in-school intervention had managed to achieve. We launched 5 years ago. We now have over 1,400. This should actually say 1,500. We just broke 1,500. We're constantly having to update our slides, our marketing team, because of this. We're the fastest growing school in the UK. Why? Why are we the fastest growing school in the UK? There's clearly a need. There is clearly an urgent need for what we are providing. We're a full-purpose secondary school, year 7 to year 13, A-levels, GCSEs, English national curriculum, but the majority of our learning, the majority of it's done online. Our unique selling point, what makes us special, is our community, and the fact we do around 9 school trips, in-person meetups across the UK a term, as well as all the other extracurriculars we offer. But it's not about MBA today. I just wanted you to sit on that. Why are we the fastest growing school in the UK? There is clearly a need for something we're doing. I made this school up. At the end of 2020, I just created an idea for a school that I thought was cool. A made-up idea. I'm not a teacher, nor a school leader. I actually came from a homeschooling background, so I understood the needs of homeschoolers. Sit with that for a moment. I want to be really clear about what's driven that growth. It's not a trend. It's parents choosing online school for convenience. It's families and increasingly schools and local authorities responding to a mainstream system for some children simply isn't working. Around 20% of our students are direct referrals from local authorities and state schools. And I'm so proud of that. Often from deputy heads who have tried everything within their building and they recognize that something different is needed. This is happening. By the way, this is happening in direct contradiction to government guidance that online provision should be temporary and exceptional. The schools know that government guidance is wrong. The local authorities know, the families know, and the data now confirms it. So let's dig into that data. Our students achieve strong outcomes. Look, we're equaling national average for GCSE results, and we're only 4 years old. We've only done 4 years worth of school. We're 5 years old in total. Equaling national average. Our maths and English higher than the national average. Our results for children with SEND much higher than the national average. I'm pretty proud of that. And that's for GCSEs. Let's go into that bit, the SEND cohort piece. At a time when the attainment gap is widening nationally, our SEND cohort, many of whom have been out of education for long periods, achieved an average score of 4.62. That's 40% above the national average at GCSE. Most tellingly though, attendance. For our dual enrolled students, children who are still on the roll of mainstream school, but accessing all their education through MVA, some of you in the room will be familiar with that if you're in state schools, the average attendance for those students is 96.3%, including children who before they joined us were classified as persistently absent. Children who haven't been going to school for 2 or 3 years are coming to MVA and achieving 96% and above attendance. And guess what happens when you attend? Engagement rises. And this is really important. So what are we doing differently? Why does it work? Why are we getting these amazing results? I'm not here telling you that online school is magic. What I'm telling you is that when you remove environmental barriers for a child who is overwhelmed by them, and you replace them with learning at their own pace, in their own space, whether that's a bedroom, a kitchen table, or a quiet corner. Number 2, a dedicated mentor once a week, one-on-one, who knows them as an individual, not a teacher managing 30 children. 3, a timetable that has genuine flexibility built into it. And 4, perhaps our secret sauce, teachers who are recruited and supported specifically for online delivery. What you then see is children re-engaging, often children who hadn't engaged in months or years. Talked about data, let's not make it all about data, okay? I want to say something slightly uncomfortable for a moment because I think that matters. We as an education system are obsessed with data, and rightly so. We need to demonstrate outcomes, we need to be accountable, and we need evidence to make the case for change. But I worry that in the SEND conversation, we have allowed the data obsession to pull us away from what should be at the center of every decision, the child and their family. A child who goes from being unable to leave the house to attending 96% of their lessons, that is a transformation. Whether or not their GCSE grades match the national average in a year doesn't fully capture what has happened to that child and that family. We should be focusing more on the student and their family than on one data set. The data is the evidence that gets us heard, but the child is the reason we're here. MVA, often described as a private school, we're playing a vital role within the state system, supporting pupils who are not served by mainstream provision. 15% of our students now are funded by local authorities, the vast majority through EACPs. We currently support 152 EACP-funded students across 53 local authorities, alongside a small number of Section 9 placements, up from 0 funded placements just 2 years ago. 0. 2 years ago, no state school or local authority was sending us kids. And now 15% of our 1,500 students are funded in that way. But demand is growing faster than provision. Hundreds of families are now on waiting lists for state-funded places at MVA. And that is not the cue for a private luxury. It's children in need being left without access to education, unable to get into a setting that works for them. We are calling for more state-funded places for children who need alternative provision and for greater recognition for the role online education can play within the system. I want to give you a lovely quote from a parent. This sort of happens every week, okay? You probably can't read it, it's a bit too small, but hi Hugh, I didn't want to bother you at Christmas, but something big has happened. We get this kind of quote every week, by the way, MBA. My son joined MBA in year 10 in December, after 4.5 years out of education, with multiple failings on the part of the local authority and several settings. He hasn't wanted to celebrate Christmas for years, as he didn't see anything to celebrate. This year, having been with MBA a term, he's been doing his computer science work during the holidays as he wants to earn accommodation. And I've just found him sitting at his computer wearing a Santa hat. A small thing, but such a big thing. I feel like my lovely boy is coming back to me and I'm just sobbing in the kitchen. Thank you to you and all your staff for daring to be different and for making a difference. wishing you the best Christmas with your family. Imagine getting that once a week. It's not good for the emotions, especially on no sleep. All right, how we do pace, Liz? Let's pick it up. All right, white paper. The school's white paper represents a real attempt to grapple with something everyone in this room knows has been broken for a long time. And I want to acknowledge that before I say anything critical, because I think it matters for those of us in the alternative provision and specialist space that we are constructive partners in this conversation, not just critics. There's genuine ambition in the paper, including the fact that the recognition that the EHCP system is under unsustainable strain. That is exactly right, okay? What's positive? The move towards local strategic SEND partnerships, alternative provision reform is long overdue, the 1.6 billion investment in strengthening mainstream capacity, and a clearer signal that the link between attendance, mental health, and SEND must be taken seriously. These are meaningful steps, and they matter. Now, where we need honesty on the EHCP question. The proposed movement towards a tiered support system, with EHCPs increasingly reserved for children with the highest levels of need, carries a real risk. EHCPs are not perfect. The process is exhausting, adversarial for families, and takes far too long. But they exist because families need certainty, not goodwill. An EHCP is the only legally enforceable protection many families have. If we raise the threshold for accessing that protection, even with the best of intentions, we risk building a system where more children are assessed, documented, and categorized, but fewer have any legal guarantee that support will actually materialize. I've said it. A digital support password could be a useful tool, but without legal force, it's just a record of need. It doesn't actually guarantee any support. And for the children in the middle, not high needs enough for the top tier, but genuinely struggling in mainstream environment, the risk is that they fall between the layers. Tiered systems look efficient on paper, but children don't progress neatly through administrative levels. I want to be practical in this final piece, because I'm not here to describe a problem I've already described. I'm here because I believe this room, school leaders, head teachers, SENCOs, teachers, I believe, and trust CEOs as well, I believe everyone in the room can actually move this forward, and I want to tell you specifically how. Stop treating alternative provision as a last resort. The single biggest cultural shift that would make the most difference is this. I'll repeat it. Stop thinking of alternative provision, AP, including high-quality online education. Stop thinking of it as a last resort, as the thing you turn to when all else has failed. Dual enrollment is not an admission of defeat. It's a professional recognition that some children learn differently, and the best outcome for a child might be a blend of environments. When a child is dual enrolled, they remain on the roll at your school, but they get most of their education with us. They might be with us a year, 2 years, sometimes 3, but they often return to your school. When a child is dual enrolled, maintaining their place on your roll while accessing specialist provision through us, they don't disappear from your community. They remain in yours. That you remain their school in so many ways, and together we serve them better than either of us could alone. We've seen this work, children who haven't attended in months starting to engage, families who were at breaking point beginning to stabilize. And when it's appropriate, some of those children transition back into your school with their confidence restored. And that is inclusion working the way it should. We'd be delighted to share our recent report, the anxiety report, with anyone that requests it afterwards, and there'll be links with which to do so. We commissioned this research to understand from a student's perspective what makes school hard, not from teachers, not from clinicians, but from the young people themselves. 2,000 secondary school pupils asked directly, and what we found was striking. Half had avoided school because of anxiety. And when you ask them why, the answers aren't what you might expect. It isn't just exams. It's the noise in the corridors, the fear of being asked to speak in front of the class, the exhaustion of holding themselves together all day in environments that feel crowded, unpredictable, and overwhelming. Only 6% said their teachers always understand how they feel. 6%. And that is what brings us back to attendance. Because these children are not choosing to stay at home. They're responding rationally to environments that feel genuinely unsafe. The data shifts the conversation away from attendance as a behavior problem and towards attendance as an environment problem. The children who struggle to come through the door are not making a choice. They are telling us something, and for a long time we haven't been listening. They're responding to environments that feel, and in many cases are, genuinely harmful to their well-being. If you take nothing away from today, I'd encourage you to read this research and share it with your pastoral and SEND teams. It reframes the conversation in a way that is both more accurate and more compassionate. I can see my timer anyway, I don't need to ask Liz. That was 6 minutes. Near the end, and then I'm going to leave some time for questions. What we also want to do, we want to push for DFE recognition of accredited virtual schools, and this is something we need your support with. I want to be direct. One of the biggest inefficiencies in the current system, one of the biggest inefficiencies, is that every local authority independently re-vets alternative provision providers, including online schools. A provider that holds a DFE accreditation has to go through a separate approval process with every single council that might want to commission them. This creates enormous duplication. It wastes hundreds of hours of staff time, and it slows down placements for children who need support now. What we need is a national framework that says if a provider holds DFE accreditation, that recognition applies automatically across all local authorities. You commission us once, we're vetted once. Then the LA can focus its resources on the child, not the paperwork. If you agree with that, say so. Write to your MP, put it in your consultation responses. The schools in this room have a collective voice, and we need it. Final point, I want to think about funding differently. Online and virtual provision is not just educationally effective, it's financially efficient in ways that matter for Stretch LA's budgets. It eliminates SEND transport costs, which are one of the fastest growing pressures on council budgets. It reduces reliance on high-cost specialist programs, and it scales in response to demand. For local authorities sitting on SEND deficits, and most of them are, this is not a niche consideration. It's a structural solution to a structural problem. I want to close with something that goes slightly beyond SEND, because while SEND is where the need is most acute and the evidence is clearest, the children who struggle to attend are not all children with formal diagnoses. Mental health, anxiety, trauma, and family disruption, these are driving school avoidance in children who may never receive an EHCP. For those children too, a system that is more flexible, more creative in how it defines being in school, and more willing to use accredited providers as part of the solution, that system works better. The goal is not to build an alternative to mainstream education. The goal is to build a system where mainstream education is stronger, more resilient, and able to meet a wider range of children because it has access to a wider range of tools. If you're interested in understanding what dual enrollment looks like in practice, speak to our team here and I'll stand over there. The conversation should not end in this room.